Next up, we have Team Ipsos again, and this is themed Steering Towards a Path Less Traveled, Pioneering Clinic 2.0, Team Ipsos.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry, we're not going to take too much of your time, but we're going to present a topic that actually is a very passionate topic for me, for people who know me. My name is Apeksha. I'm from Ipsos, and today we're going to be presenting to you a paper on steering towards a path less traveled, pioneering Clinic 2.0. I have my co-authors here with me, Aanchal and Mamta, and we hope you find this paper as interesting as we found doing the research. So the Indian car market right now is in a flux. Why do we say that? 3 reasons. Number one, we have seen a plethora of launches in the last few years in the Indian car industry. It is the first time in the Indian automotive industry that we've seen so many choices available to the customer. But choices are good, right? So why the problem? The problem is that when there are functionally similar products offered at overlapping price points, at that point in time, not only does it make harder for the customers to choose the right product, but also for the marketeers to create a distinct identity for themselves and differentiate. The market starts moving towards commoditization. Finally, as we all know, our customers are evolving. They have more information at hand, and hence what they seek from a brand becomes that much more higher. Now, in the light of this, when we received a brief to do another car clinic, which is typically a product evaluation test for a car, our first thought was we've done it multiple times before, we can do it again, not a big deal. However, apart from the clutter and overlap, there were a few other underlying challenges that we could clearly identify in the brief. Number one, the product was ready for launch. So any changes or any differentiation that we could have recommended to the client could have only come from their marketing plan, nothing from a product point of view. Second, the product was straddling 2 segments. In the past, we had seen that products with confused imagery have a tendency to become failures. So we had to ensure that confusing customers was completely avoided. Finally, because of the overlaps that are existing in the category, the positioning had to be very, very nuanced. So, again, like I mentioned, we could have done a standard clinic and it would have given us normal things like product likes, dislikes, who likes the product, who does not like the product, pricing, etc. However, it would not have given us a unique, non-overlapping positioning as we had wanted in this brief. It would not have given us a proper segment fit, which was very much required for this product. And finally, it would not have given us a unique go-to-market strategy. So we had to break the clutter. We had to think beyond. But we had to keep in mind that ultimately the car clinic format had to be followed along with the set timelines and budget. So what do we have? We pushed our boundaries, we thought apart, and we evolved to Clinic 2.0. Now, you may say that Clinic 2.0 just sounds fancy, but what was different about it? We actually changed the entire lens of how we do product evaluations. Typically, product evaluations are all about the product. Anything, what works in the product, what doesn't work in the product, what do people like, dislike, etc. Here, we made consumers our focal point. We realized that if we wanted to attract the customers to a relevant positioning, we needed to ensure that we understand them and their world in a much more detailed and granular manner. So we distilled first, we identified consumer themes, and we expanded on those themes by using multiple sources of data. After that is when we evaluated the product and saw how does the product fit into those consumer needs. So we started with the consumer and then went to the product rather than doing the other way around. Finally, we expressed a strategy that actually was interactive enough to be able to be understood by the client and their creative partners. Another interesting thing about our approach was that to understand the consumers, we realized that again, we cannot rely on traditional data methodology, collection methodologies like quantitative and qualitative. We had to look beyond the usual. Hence comes social intelligence, hence comes expert interviews. Even in the consumer part, we did multiple things, which my colleague is going to talk about. But the idea was that we had to look at it more holistically. So our approach was very method neutral. We did not have any one particular focus on only quantitative or qualitative, but any array of information that actually could give us relevant sources, we actually use those to actually make it a 360-degree evaluation rather than a linear one. Now we're going to talk about some of the other thing also was that it actually fit in well with our brand success narrative, which actually talks about shaping expectations about how people feel about the brand and the category, context about understanding what is happening in their lives, and finally delivering with empathy to be able to connect with those customers better. Now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Aanchal, who's going to take you through some snippets of how we achieved all of this.
Thanks, Apeksha. And while all this approach, when we were designing it, looked really good on paper, but the real test was executing it on ground and validate our thought process. Like we said, consumer became our core of the entire approach. We made the entire approach very consumer-centric. So it was very important that we immerse ourselves completely into the consumer environment. For that, we did multiple things like personality test, ethnography session to understand the definers of those personality traits which were coming out in not just their space of their homes, but also in the space of their cars through drive-alongs, because that's what we were trying to understand ultimately, the interplay of the cars in their life ecosystem. Another thing which we did was we kept in mind one important aspect which generally in automobile research we tend to forget, the families. Car is a shared space, it's not an individual space, and families do bring along a lot of beautiful insights which we thought we need to capture, and they were a part of the ethnography sessions and drive-alongs therefore. And then after that, we challenged the existing category definitions to come to the core themes, consumer themes, which became the key highlight of our approach. Now the next point was to understand these themes better. So we zoomed into all these themes which we had identified through our social 101. The idea was that there's a lot of large volumes of highly engaged conversations by new age consumers residing with us online. Why not look into it, and why not just go wide to understand the deeper nuances? And that's what we did. We did an exhaustive analysis on those data which is available, and that helps us add a diagnostic richness to our data. And finally, we landed to the core of our entire research, our approach, Clinic 2.0. We did what we do in normal clinic. The base framework remained the same. We evaluated the product with the consumers. But what made it different was that we were not evaluating on key likes and dislikes on a car, but the core themes, consumer themes, which we had identified through our exhaustive, qualitative, and social 101 initiatives. We further zoomed into the product through evolved techniques like eye tracking and visual metaphors to further define the imagery and positioning of the car which was coming in. And we did not forget the families here as well. The family interviews were also conducted to understand their perspective and their point of view as well. And that is what gave us an additional layer of understanding and develop a sharper strategy for our new car. Now we had all the data with us, but what was also important was to seamlessly synthesize all the data into something which we were aiming for, what we were actually looking at. And therefore, that's where our experts came into picture. And with them, they had the global foresight into the automobile market, and they had the understanding of consumer context in for Indian consumers. With their help, we further sharpened the entire insights, and we tied it all together with our client and creative agency workshops, where the idea was to brainstorm and come up with a strategy which was not only focusing on what we should be doing, but also what we should be steering away from, so that there's no overlap again coming in to the strategy for our product versus what is already present in the market. And like there was an initial question which we had put on our slide also, we did visualize our output earlier when the brief came to us and we did not like it. So after finishing everything, did we like the outputs which were coming in? Yes, we were. We were very happy, but the proof of the pie is also in eating it. And the impact story spoke volumes when the client also appreciated and accepted the differentiation which this strategy brought to their overall launch positioning strategy, and it completely transformed on how they were looking at the test product. And now when we were working on the paper, we also realized that if we use this approach well of making the entire thing consumer-centric, it has much wider applicability for the research world. There were many learnings. We have put some here. One, we need to push our boundaries, especially when it comes to those templatized kind of researches. When we do that, we'll actually know that there's a lot which we can evolve, and that opportunities are also limitless because of that. We have to shift our focal point from the product to the consumers. We tend to look at the product, look at the strengths of the product, and then define the potential TG. However, what we should be rather doing is we should understand the consumers and see how can the product add value to their lives, and then we will have a much longer association with the consumer as well. And for that, it's very important that we do immerse ourselves in the consumer's environment. Third, there are a lot of data sources available all around us. There's a lot of data which we tend to ignore normally, and we need to tap into all those new data sources and leverage the technology for the same. Lastly, while we might have used it for a car clinic, this has a wider applicability for any product, because ultimately the approach is all about being consumer-centric and method-neutral, and that can be done for any product category as well. There's no black box approach is what we learned eventually, and through that we think we made a difference, and we can continue making that difference if we just keep evolving ourselves. So that's we have. Thank you very much.
Given that, sorry, please. Question from PS. Given that auto clinics are very expensive, how did it impact the time with the engagement with consumers? How did it impact the engagement time with consumers?
Okay, so yeah, one of the things that we had written on the slide and mentioned as well is that we had to do everything, but we could not extend our budget or timeline or the format. And that is what we actually managed to do. So instead of employing the usual strategic frameworks that are generally done to understand consumers, all of this we did within the same format. Of course, adding layers to the analysis as well as leveraging newer sources of data. But all of this was done in a similar timeline and budget as was, as for a standard clinic. So it wasn't like it was 2 times more expensive or something like that. It was exactly the same amount that the client finally paid to us. That's it. Thank you. Thank you.